If you're interested in a book that has had a massive impact on how we think about community, social engagement, and the divisiveness in our culture, and how that is playing out in modern life in America, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community by Robert Putnam. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're talking about a book that I've heard a lot about in the last decade probably, but even more so in probably the last 4 or 5 years. I think this became especially pronounced during the pandemic, and a lot of what was found in this book has continued to resonate with people, even though it was written 25 years ago, and I think a lot of its discussion about the internet may have proven to be even more impactful than I think Robert Putnam realized. But he does an excellent job in this book in going beyond just the impact of the internet, although that is certainly something that he considers. I have heard about it from a lot of different podcasts or just other sociological books that reference it. Robert Putnam's analysis of social capital and its decline has been widely discussed. And like I said, I've heard him personally on some podcasts, let alone this work being frequently referenced, which is, of course, is what made me want to finally pick it up and read it. What struck me most is that much of what he predicted about the dangers of our decline in social connections has absolutely been realized, and in some cases probably even more than he suspected at the time. Putnam was already wary of the impact of the internet 25 years ago, and honestly, his concerns have turned out to be even more accurate than he probably imagined. If he thought television and suburbanization were breaking down social ties, imagine what he'd say about modern social media and algorithm-driven echo chambers and the rise of virtual-only friendships, and of course, during the pandemic when we left the classroom and entered onto an all-virtual learning space that I think made it all the worse. This was published in 2000, and just so you know, Robert Putnam himself is an academic. His deep dive into America's declining social capital is really based off of his own personal interest and his expertise in the area. And I should clarify a few things. The term social capital refers to the networks and relationships and trust that help societies to function. Putnam argues that since the mid-20th century, so again, we're talking long before the rise of the internet, he is really looking at, actually, TV is probably the thing that he focuses on the most. That, and like I said, suburbanization of America are probably the two things that we can point to that had already caused significant divisions within existing communities, and just this lack of connections within communities between various groups, be that socioeconomical, racial groups, or whatever. And he argues that Americans have been participating less in civic life, things like voting and joining clubs and attending religious services, and even just hanging out with neighbors. And he thinks that there's a wide variety of things that are that reason, but of course, all of that is directly affecting basically everyone's lives. The book is titled Bowling Alone because Putnam uses the decline of bowling leagues as a symbol of this larger social shift. More people are bowling than ever, but they're doing it alone instead of in leagues, which means they're missing out on the community building benefits that leagues once provided. I should say that he points this out in lots of things, not just that, but we've seen it in youth sports, we've seen it in church attendance, lots of things that I have done completely separate videos on. So I guess this has been a question that's been lingering in my mind for a while, because I keep being drawn to books that are helping to illustrate that point. And so Putnam asks what caused this decline in civic engagement, and he identifies several factors. So like I've already said, television and media consumption are one of the big things he focuses on. I would say that he does touch upon the internet, but I would probably actually now put that at number one. But he illustrates how long before the internet, you already had these declines in participation. So he argues that people started spending more time in front of screens and less time engaging with their communities. Again, all the more obvious nowadays. Another thing that I think is a little less obvious is this emphasis on suburbanization and urban sprawl. As people moved to the suburbs, they spent more time commuting and less time engaging in local activities. Once upon a time, commuting was also part of your social interactions. You frequently chose to commute with people that you knew, or just being on a train around other people, or being on a bus around other people. That did provide some social interaction in a way that you could not necessarily easily identify the social benefits of it, but just being around people does have social benefits in helping us to understand how we should interact with individuals. And as more jobs became more demanding and more people entered the workforce, especially women, there was less free time for civic participation. He argues that older generations were more likely to join clubs and organizations, while younger generations showed declining participation in these traditional institutions. And these changes led to fewer PTA meetings and fewer neighborhood barbecues. And yes, as I've said several times, fewer bowling leagues, hence the name of the book. But what Putnam really emphasizes is that this erosion of social capital isn't just a nostalgic problem, it's actively making our society weaker. So we think of people always complain about, oh, in the good old days, I used to do this, I used to do that, things used to be this way or that way, I was a latchkey kid, all these things. And a lot of times that's just nostalgia. But in this case, he's pointing out how no, this isn't just people bemoaning our current day and saying things used to be better. He is trying to demonstrate in what ways it is making us a weaker society, giving us less sense of connection and community with the people around us, and how it can have all sorts of knock-on effects of the communities that we live in, from large cities down to our neighborhoods and even down to within our families. This loss of social capital can have an impact on all of those. Putnam argues that this loss of social capital has real consequences. Communities with lower social capital tend to have lower trust in government and institutions. I think the rise of beliefs in conspiracy theories are evidences of that. You have weaker local economies, since networking and community engagement often fuels business opportunities. You have worse public outcomes because strong social ties have been linked to longer life expectancy and lower stress levels. You have less civic engagement, meaning lower voter turnout and weaker local political influences, which is going to also drive extremism, because that means that the extreme parts of the party, the ones that are actively going to the polls more frequently, are going to have a much larger influence. So basically, a disconnected society isn't just lonely, it's less healthy, it's less economically strong, and it's less politically engaged. And considering where we are today, I'd say Putnam was eerily on point. 2000 is a fascinating time for him to have published this book. We were about a decade into the use of the internet, still not on a majorly wide scale, I would argue. I personally in school, I mean, we had internet probably ever since I was in elementary school, so in the early 90s, but we probably had high-speed internet when I got into high school. We had laptops from our high school, and so the school had Wi-Fi pretty early on. And so I would argue about 2000 is a major turning point. We're still a couple years before some of the most important elements of the internet. So social media didn't quite exist yet. You didn't have YouTube. You didn't have your streaming sites. So there was still a lot of infrastructure and platforms to build out. But he wrote this, I think, just as the promises of the internet were becoming not just manifested, but we're starting to see what they might look like. And of course, this is based off of decades of research before that. So I think that what he had to say at this moment was very insightful, but also it would need to be tweaked a little. Like I said, more than the internet at this time, he was a little more concerned with stuff like how TV was isolating people back in 2000. And while he mentioned the internet, I don't think he could have seen anything like what it has become. And again, I really think that the pandemic just exacerbated that all the more. And so today we don't just have these fewer civic groups and these in-person socializations. We have entire generations whose main form of social engagement is happening through screens. And so social media gives the illusion of connection, but studies have shown that it often deepens loneliness rather than solving it. In many ways, Putnam's fears about individualizing leisure time have come true on a much grander scale. I will also say that while Bowling Alone is a landmark book, it's not without its criticisms. I think 25 years in many ways has proven it, but it has also helped to point out where it could be a little more refined. Some argue that Putnam focuses too much on traditional organizations like the Elks Lodge or Rotary Club, while ignoring new forms of social engagement that have emerged, such as online communities. Others note that while social capital has declined in some areas, it has actually increased in others, just in different ways than before. So there are certain organizations that have declined significantly in recent years, but then there are other organizations that we have seen an increase in its community, and in some ways that can be really hard to measure. So for example, I'm a member of a magician society. This society has, over the years, the average age of the individuals in the society has certainly increased, and I think its total membership has declined. And that's not necessarily that there's less magicians, right? It's just that there are fewer magicians that is the way that they engage. On the flip side, there is a much larger community on the internet of people interested in magic. We actually see significantly more diversity in magic these days because of the access that is provided by the internet, which is something that I personally love. And so this is a place where you can see a little bit of critique. However, it does seem to be the case that even with massive online communities, it is really hard to beat face-to-face encounters in most situations. He's really putting his finger on the pulse here, that I really think that it is the core part of his argument that has been proven to be true and is something that I think actively needs to be addressed by us as a society and a culture if we want to see a reversal of it, or if we just want to continue seeing this fragmentation of society. Another critique is that Putnam largely focuses on middle-class white Americans, with less attention given to how marginalized communities have historically navigated civic engagement differently. Some researchers argue that communities of color and immigrant groups have always relied on different, often informal networks of social capital that don't fit neatly into Putnam's analysis. So those are just a couple of the main criticisms that he has gotten over the years. I would say that despite its limitations, Bullying Alone is an incredibly important book. It's a fascinating book at how society has changed over the past few decades, and it raises questions that are still relevant today. And if you're interested in sociology or political science, or just wondering why your neighborhood feels quieter than it did 50 years ago, this book is absolutely worth your time. That being said, it is a dense read. Putnam includes a ton of data and statistics. He is an academic at his heart, so I would certainly argue that if you're looking for a quick or a light social science book, this may not be it. So if you're thinking more along the lines of, say, Freakonomics, so Stephen Dubner and Levitt, or say Malcolm Gladwell, this is not it. He's not going to have that like powerful narrative-driven approach. He's going to hit you over the head with lots of data. And I think if you have the patience for it, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I personally think this book has only become more relevant in the years since it was published, and Putnam's warning about all sorts of technology. I keep saying the internet, but I think specifically, he was already really pointing to the issue when he pointed to screens. At the time, that would have mostly meant watching a lot of TV, but the bottom line was a screen was an isolating thing at the time. And I think that that has continued to be proven true. Just, I think that there's a lot more ways that we can have that continued conversation. I'm sure he has had follow-up work, but this is the truly seminal work that he came out with that I think is definitely worth a read if you're curious about why it's being cited so often by other people that are curious about why the world is the way it is at this moment, especially when it comes to social interactions. And as I've said about 10 times, social capital. I think all of that is really valuable information. So who is this book for? Well, it is for people that want to get an understanding of the first major argument about why we are becoming so separated and so fragmented in society. And like I've said, this really powerful argument that has really resonated and has been redoubled in lots of other studies and conversations. And I think that for anyone that wants that, but is also willing to go through quite a lot of pages of it, I would imagine you could probably find some shorter, more succinct version of the book, but I really wanted to get to the original premise and the original thesis, and I thought it was worth it, but I could see why that might not be for everyone. So who's this book not for? Well, if you don't think that we have an issue, or if you are afraid of reading about just how bad things have gotten because we have too many screens, then maybe this book is not for you. Or like I said, if you're not interested in all of the data that he's going to provide, then again, this book may not be for you. But I would love to hear what you guys think about this book or other books that make similar arguments, or that are arguing about the same issues, but maybe they have a completely different approach, or they have a completely different argument that is maybe arguing that all of our connectivity through the internet is a good thing. I don't know. Please let me know in the comments. But don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.